And we'll get started. Awesome. So welcome everybody. Thanks. Just in the throes of the beginning of the school year, and you decide to join up for this long PD. So I really appreciate your time and you know, just wanting to spend a couple hours with me. So I'm very thankful for that. So the goal of today is looking at ways to support our beginning proficiency EAL students in the secondary, so grades 7 to 12. And yeah, and so what are some tools, routines to work with that? And just you know, just so you know, then I won't be delving into the benchmarks. There will be a session, I think on the 18th and 19th of September. There'll be a few sessions, there'll be repeat sessions about delving into the benchmarks, so in the new benchmarks. So yeah, so we won't touch on that yet, and because I've already got enough here. So so yeah, so just thinking about the time of year, and you know, it's getting a little chillier where I am. I'm in Treaty 6. I'm in Sherwood Park, and I have sunflowers blooming, and I have one that's really has a really big head that a lovely little bird planted for me somehow, and it's just a huge head, but it's so heavy it's just drooping down. I hope it stays the way it's I hope it doesn't fall over. So but it's such a you know, thinking about sunflowers, it's quite quite incredible. Like, its roots are from North America. It's indigenous to here, but when settlers came, then they said, wow, what an amazing flower, and they brought it. Some of those seeds made it back to other lands, and you may know now that it's the national flower of Ukraine. It's also a flower to support mental health, and not only that, but it's also, you know, a source of nourishment. We have sunflower oils, we have just the beauty, and then the things that it does for our beautiful bees. So you know, so many gifts from the land that we have. So I just like to acknowledge all of you here, that we're all on treaty land, and just grateful to the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today, and those who have gone before us. And we recognize the land as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those on whose territory we reside, work, and play. So yeah, so if you see a sunflower, say thanks for being you, sunflower. So our objectives today are just to look at some evidence-based tools and routines that support EAL newcomer secondary students. And we're going to be using Slido. So well, I'll just show you in the next slide how to connect to that. And, you know, just we'll have that opportunity to share your thoughts and ideas using Slido, or if you want to type in the chat, I'll be kind of looking at both of those. So the way to join Slido is if you hold up your phone to this QR code, you can join, you know, just like you're at a restaurant, and connect to that QR code, and it'll take you to the Slido page. So and you should get something that has like a Q&A on it, and that'll be, you'll see Q&A. You can use it to type questions, but we'll also be using it to type polls. So I'll just give you a second, and even the subsequent slides that have Slido on them, then you can just join that. So give you just a second there. Or if you're just have another tab open on your browser, you can also go to slido.com and then just enter that hashtag 3632436, and that'll take you to that as well. Awesome. So we're going to go to, on the next slide, we're going to go to our first kind of question. And these questions are going to help us kind of, you know, ground ourselves, help me understand where you're at in your journey here. And hopefully the questions that you generate, I'll be able to answer throughout the the presentation. So looking at this, so you can, you'll see that on your Slido, it automatically pops up to this question, and you can type in your answer here. So just wondering what you're hoping to discover from this presentation, any questions or concerns or both that you might have about working with beginning proficiency EAL students. So yeah, so just take some time to give you a couple minutes just to type in here what you're thinking, what might be, what brought you here today. So we got one person entering some things, 2 people. So yeah, got 3. And if you're not able to access it, feel free to type any questions that you have in the chat as well. Okay, so looking for some new ideas about working with EAL students. Right. See what some other things are that come up. And the more questions we have, and maybe they come up throughout that, but you may also, a lot of vocabulary words specific to subjects that students struggle with. How do we support them in learning this vocabulary, not having them fall behind? Excellent question. Great. So a few more come in. Anything else? Strategies, what to do with new EAL students. Great, when they don't speak any English. Yes. Great, because we're getting, students from Ukraine, students from, all over the world, whatever their situation may be, are coming in and entering our classrooms. And yeah, how can we best support them? Awesome. So I don't see any bouncing bubbles around there anymore. So we'll see. Maybe there's going to be some more questions as we go down the road. But let's take a look. So some of the things that I wanted to acknowledge first, when you're thinking, oh, sorry, there was one in the chat too, strategies to help support students learning new vocabulary, completing grade level assignments. Yes, great, awesome. That's a great question too, thanks. So just thinking about the stages of second language acquisition, just want to, for those of you who may be new to working with students who speak other languages, and maybe you haven't gone on that adventure of trying to learn a language as well, and those who have worked with other students or maybe have learned other languages, you may recognize some of these stages. So first off, there's the pre-production stage, and this is kind of when students are, brand new to Canada, brand new to the language, 0 to 6 months of exposure of English or of any language. Maybe they're learning German, wherever it may be. But they're in the pre-production stage, and you'll notice that students do a lot of observing, do a lot of listening, and do a lot of gesturing. So they may point to things that they need. They may give some signs I'm hungry, or they hold their stomach, or they cross their legs because they have to go to the bathroom, whatever it may be. So lots of, taking in information, but just not having the language yet to be able to put something out. So to produce any English yet. But they still have language. They come with language, but maybe how can they express it in English? After about 6 to 12 months, you'll notice that they're kind of using a lot of, they understand simple things like simple instructions, or, sentences are quite short. They may start speaking in more sentences, have some um, um, produce short sentences and things like that. Then there's speech emergence. There's that 1 to 3 years that they'll start expanding their language proficiency. You may start to think, wow, they're really fluent in this stage. Like, they've been here for a little while. They've made friends. Play on the basketball team. They make, can tell some jokes or whatever it may be. So, so they're starting to speak a bit more. Then they're moving into 3 to 5 years, intermediate fluency, and they're at this stage they're using lots more academic language. That's starting to build up that abstract piece. We're going to touch on that a little bit, but so they start to sound a little bit more like our English speaking students that were born in Canada. And then 5 to 7 years, if they've had, and that's for all of these levels, if they've had explicit instruction, the language has been made clear to them, they know where to pick up on things, then probably in about 5 to 7 years, they'll have native like proficiency. But that's, just like when we're growing a plant, then what are all the great conditions that we need for that plant to grow, flower, like our sunflower, right? So produce seeds and be vibrant. So what are all those conditions that our students would need to reach this native like proficiency? So we're going to touch on some of those ideas as well. But before we get into that, I just want to share also some of the stages, not only of language proficiency, but of cultural accommodation. So you may notice that some of our students, they come, they're very excited, and they have that initial period of excitement about their surroundings. So then they'll have that, kind of like when Dorothy lands in the Wizards of Oz, she's kind of excited about all those things. And then we're also, they might have a bit of culture shock, and then they have some anger, some hostility, frustration, homesickness, resentment towards the new culture. So, they just don't want to be here because they want to be with their friends. They want to be, the language is just something that they struggle with. They can't get their opinions, their ideas out. So they may go through that stage of culture shock. Then they might move to a stage of acceptance, and they gradually accept the different surroundings, start to feel a little bit more at home here, and start to recognize some of those, like calming down a bit. And then there's that assimilation adaptation phase. I can't say that I like the word assimilation that much, because we want them to more adapt to their surroundings and their new culture, but also kind of blend everything together, right? So how can they take, all the things that they know about their culture and bring that into what they're experiencing here in Canada and feel like they're a part of it, right? So those are some things that are in this article that's hyperlinked here to how to create a welcoming classroom environment for ELLs from Coloring Colorado. And if you haven't noticed here yet in the bottom corner, I do have a bit.ly, and I'll just type that into the chat, or a QR code that you can access the slides, and so that you can be first to get these slides, and you don't have to wait for the PDF to come or the recording later. But so there's just something, and those who are watching the recording, they can you can also have access to those slides as well. So so just some things to think about what our students may be going through in those first few weeks, and of what they may be feeling. The first thing that you may want to think about when you're working with your student is thinking about their name. And just going to show a quick little video here. It's about a minute and a half, 2 minutes long. And I just, type in the chat if you'd like, or some things that you may be thinking about, noticing, wondering, just when I show this quick little piece here.
준호야, 준호, 준호야. 준호야. 네. 이준호. 이준호.
준호야.
Daniel, it's nice to meet you. I'm Miss Anderson.
준호야. 준호야. 준호야.
네. 다니 일어났어?
Hey, Daniel.
Lee Jun-ho. Is Lee Jun-ho here?
Yeah, that's me. You can just call me Daniel.
Great. So yeah, or we're a pretty small group right now. So if you'd like to turn on your mic as well, or type something in the chat, there are some things that you're thinking about while when you watch this. Were you shocked? Were you sad? Were you happy? Did you connect with any of it? Give me a couple of moments here to put something into the chat. Okay, so while maybe some of you are just finishing, there we go. Yes, names are an important part of identity, sense of self. So crucial with building positive student relationships. Yeah, exactly. And I'll tell a little story from a couple of little stories from my own personal experience, and maybe you can connect to some of those. But so my parents came from Germany, and when they came to Canada, their last name and my maiden name was Jaeger. So that's how you would pronounce it, Jaeger. And yeah, important to respect their name by pronouncing it correctly, and it values their identity. Yes, thank you. And but then when we came to Canada, or when my parents came to Canada, then they had to change the spelling, because the way that you spell it in German, J-A with the 2 dots, the umlaut, J-E-R, they don't have that in Canada. So they went J-A-E-G-E-R. So, and everybody called me Stephanie Jaeger. But, if I went to Germany, then I would be Stephanie Jaeger, Stefania Jaeger. So anyway, a little while later, as I got into my 20s and met my husband, and his last name is Dodick, and I took his name. And then we had a son, and we have a daughter too. But then when our son was in grade 10, then the teacher, at the beginning of the year, would call out students' names and say, call them their first name and then their last name. And so he says, Ryan Dodick, are you here? And Ryan's like, yeah. He put up his hand. Yeah, I'm here. And so this went on for a couple of weeks. And Mr. Dodick, are you here? Yeah, I'm here. And finally, Ryan said, actually, you pronounce it Dodick. And the teacher called Ryan, wrote Dodick up on the board, D-O-D-Y-K, and called him up and said, so Ryan, this is why you should pronounce it. It should be pronounced Dodick. So, and then started giving him some phonetic explanation of why it should be called Dodick. That really didn't make Ryan feel very comfortable. One, you're grade 10, you're 14, 15, being called up to the front of the class and then given a lesson on how you should pronounce your name after you've had that name for about 14, 15 years, and everybody's been calling you Dodic, including your parents. So, yeah, so, and that's just for a Canadian speaking student, right? Or a Canadian born student. And so when we think about it, like some comments in the chat, names represent an individual's identity, heritage, and culture, right? So attacking someone's name and telling them the way that they should pronounce it is, kind of saying something about their identity. Anyway, so, and like you also said in the chat, taking that time to pronounce them correctly is one way to show respect for students and their families. So a couple of ways that are highlighted in this Education Week article that are hyperlinked here on the bottom of the slide deck. But, taking some time to review the class rosters before that first day of school is one way. So you can say, okay, there's some names in here that I'm not familiar with. Where can I go? Who can I ask to help me pronounce these correctly? And then taking the time to practice those pronunciations, right? Because it takes a little while sometimes for our mouths and our tongues to get used to pronouncing different things or different words a different way. And then, or you could just let students say their names first, right? In the given example of with my son, okay, so if the teacher comes up, what's your name? Ryan Dodic. Okay, I see it on the list. Now I've heard it, and now I know how to pronounce that. Okay, and then also maybe when you're listening to having their students say their names first, you can write out that phonetic pronunciation. So, and then also encouraging those students to correct your mispronunciations, right? Like not giving them the reason why you should say it this way. So, and also, turning to technology, like having Mote. There's that Google Chrome extension called Mote, or there's another website called Name Drop. So maybe even during that intake process, whoever's doing the intake for your division, that they, maybe just record this, have the students say their name on a recording, and then it could be shared out with the teachers that are going to be supporting them through whatever semester. So yeah, so it's just, those are just some ideas on thinking it, but thank you for realizing that that's that opportunity to, that names are tied to identity and so much more, right? Okay, so there is a link if you are on Facebook. One of the places that I've learned so much and got lots of resources from is a Facebook group called Leading ELLs, and it's from Pamela Broussard. She's kind of the administrator of it. She's great knowledge, has great knowledge and experience with all of these things, and she shares some of her insights with the work that she does. So as you can see, some of these are like kind of elementary bound, but there are some in here that can be used for secondary. And if you click on the link here, click on the image, it will take you to hopefully not just a white screen, but it'll take you to a PDF, and where all of these, pronouncing students' names, getting it right, all of the stories, they're all hyperlinked in this document. So, and then there's some professional resources like how to pronounce student names. So if you're thinking, in your staff email to include some of that. Santa Clara County Office has a wonderful project called My Name, My Identity. So, even for thinking with beginner students who are new to English, these are very easy entry for students to share some of their background because of their name, their story. This Noah Daniel is, also the reference guide here, but Noah Daniel, What's in a Name? He has a little blog there and some great videos from Dr. Carol Salva in her, and how one student in particular, my internet's a little slow, so I'm not going to click on them because we'll just be sitting here looking at this spinning wheel. But I apologize for that. But where one student worked with Dr. Caro Salva and how he appreciated connecting things that he knew into the learning. So if you think about so many ideas that you can do with names, right? So what's the story of your name? How did you come to that name? How did you maybe having little acrostic poems and things like that. So these are some ideas. There's also, secondary, the name project, what's in a name, my name project, and acrostic poems, like I said. So those are a couple of ideas that you may want to think about. And I'm just trying to think now how to get out of here. And so that's a resource for you that you may want to look into. We're going to just be talking about some instructional strategies now, but before we do that, I'd just like to get you to watch this short little video. They say elementary school, but it could be a secondary science lesson as well. And, what are some things that you are noticing, thinking, wondering while you're watching this little video here?
In this simulation, you've recently moved your family to a new place, and you are attending a new elementary school. Pay attention to the lesson and be prepared to write down 5 things the teacher talked about.
Bom dia, estudantes! Ontem discutimos os ácidos e as bases. Hoje vamos aprender se algumas substâncias comuns da casa são ácidos ou bases. Vamos determinar o pH e outras características de cada substância, igual que descrever os resultados da nossa investigação. Antes de começar, vou recordá-los que enquanto trabalhamos no laboratório, vocês devem sempre usar os seus óculos de proteção, luvas e aventais. Nunca podem tocar, cheirar, saborear ou misturar qualquer material até eu os diga que possam. Cada grupo vai precisar dos seguintes materiais que estão especificados na sua folha de exercícios: 8 tiras de papel tornassol, amostras de água destilada, suco de limão, vinagre, bicarbonato de sódio e amônia, copos plásticos, óculos de proteção, avental e luvas. Como expliquei, vamos medir o pH de substâncias comuns da casa para determinar se são ácidos ou bases. O pH é medido usando uma escala de 0 a 14. As substâncias com o pH mais baixo que 7 são ácidos. Olhem o vermelho. As substâncias que têm um pH mais alto que 7 são bases. Olhem o azul. As que têm um pH de 7 são neutrais. Olhem o branco. Para determinar o pH de uma substância, tomem uma tira de papel tornassol e molhá-la numa das suas substâncias.
Now it's time to write down 5 things your teacher talked about. Be sure to include at least one of the many safety tips.
All right. So feel free to unmute or type something in the chat. What are some things that you were noticing, thinking, wondering during this little lesson? No visuals. Yeah. Looking for words that sound similar to my languages. Yeah. Did you pick up on any? Yeah, I've agreed. Picked up on a few. Yeah. I've watched this video so many times. Like I remember the first time watching it going, what's this all about? What are we supposed to? And then safety. What safety features? I don't remember her thinking about any safety features. Awesome. Yeah, what we're supposed to do was in English, but yeah, picking up on what we're supposed to be listening for. No idea. What am I supposed to be listening for? What am I supposed to pay attention to? Yeah, awesome. Great. Okay, so let's take a look. Think about that situation. Was that an ideal condition for language learning? Was that something that you knew where to start, or were you just hoping that things kind of slowly blended in, right? So let's take a look at some of these. These are from Elizabeth Coelho's book, Adding English, a guide to teaching in multilingual classrooms. And this is what it looks like, sort of without the glare. Sorry about that. It's a great resource, great resource, lots of ideas. It's very text heavy though, I'll warn you on that. Like if you look at these pages, it's all words. And so yeah, it's not something that you may want to, if you do consider it, you may want to make sure that you have some time to go over it. But anyway, I've got the bullet points of pages 160 to 161 for you here. And so what she suggests, and evidence and research has shown that having exposure to vast quantities of language is one condition that's ideal for language learners or language learning. And if you're thinking about exposures to vast quantities of language, so that they're getting it through text, that they're listening, they're speaking, and that they're writing it, so that all four strands are kind of incorporated into that. Also that they have lots of opportunities to interact with more proficient language users, right? So thinking about that, not that they're just siloed into proficiency groups where they're all proficiency level 1 or level 2 or whatever it may, beginning proficiency, but they have opportunities to interact with more proficient language users, like experts, right? So just like thinking about when you're in phys ed or whatever and you're learning a new sport, say basketball, you're going to look to the phys ed teacher to figure out how to do layups or how to do point shots or whatever it may be, right? So, or how to dribble the ball. You're going to look for someone who knows how to do that already and try to copy off of them. And similarly, it might be like that for learning a language. The other big piece too, and especially for secondary, sometimes we might slip our minds, but that there is no expectations to understand or produce language that is too far beyond their current stage of language development. So remember at the beginning, I showed you those stages of language development. So if you're in that pre-production stage, if you have a student that's in that pre-production stage, you're not expecting them to write a 5-page essay or things like that on globalization or something like that. So, or source analysis or whatever it may be. So what can you do to still let them meet that learning target, but that they can share their thinking about globalization, but scaffolding it in a way that matches their stage of language development. Also that the language directed to them is simplified so that you have shorter sentences, a slower rate of speech, a repetition of words and phrases. So what are the really important words and phrases that you want them to get out of the lesson, or that they kind of build into their repertoire, that's simplified. Also thinking about slower rate of speech. We'll talk a little bit about it again later, but as we're learning languages, and you have to think that languages are constructed differently. So for example, some Asian languages are very tonal, and that they're just listening for the inflection. And when we're inflecting in our voices in English, they may think that has a change in meaning or something like that. Or also, when their ear is trained for that tonal language, they may have a hard time discerning where the end of words happen, right? And I think that could be true for any language. I'm trying to learn French, and it all sounds like one big word, right? So just thinking about those pieces as well, that languages are constructed differently. English, we have usually starts with a consonant, ends with a consonant for the large part. And for those languages where their ears are attuned to listen to inflections, it could be hard to listen, to pick up on those end consonants. And the other piece is that the language is directed to them is strongly linked to context, so that you have visuals, right? So that, like you were saying in the chat here, that we have some visuals that may help understand what that science lesson was about, right? So, and thinking about some of that. And also, if they make some errors in their language, that we don't point out, and we don't point it out, we don't criticize them for it, but that we, model those correct utterances and rephrase it. And then also that their responses are expanded upon. So if they just give you a yes or a no answer, then ask them some more probing questions to get them a little bit more, pulling some more information out. So don't just let it stop at one. And then also that the language is learned through purposeful use, right? So when you're thinking about, again, back to the name story, where students can connect what they know to the context of the material. So I'm using myself a lot as these examples, just because these are some of the things that stuck out for me while I was trying to learn language and reflecting upon it. So trying to learn French, took a continuing ed course to figure out a few things, and then I thought, oh, okay, well, I'm going to learn French, and then I'll be able to sit on at a bistro on the Champs-Élysées, or in some, in wine country somewhere in the Rhone region or wherever it may be, and then have a nice glass of wine, and I'll be able to, one, order the glass of wine in French, and two, maybe discuss with the vintner what, like the delicate undertones of the glass of wine that I've just taken from their vineyard and tasted from their vineyard. So I was thinking I would learn all these things in my French class, but I get to French and it's chapter 1. We're going to go over these points. So I figured out Je m'appelle Stéphanie in the first one, but then moving on, then it's mon chat, mon chien, learning about dogs, cats, cars, whatever it may be, but nothing that helped me order a glass of wine in French. So I was like, this isn't what I signed up for. This isn't what I wanted. So, but in that respect, I hope what I'm sharing with you today is purposeful for you. So not just language, but also the content. But when we also think about, oops, I'm just going to go back a couple here. When we also think those ideal conditions for language learners, we need to remember that our students are going to take what they know about their language and map it on to English. So if they're not given a guide, if it's not made explicit for them, they're going to take what they understand to be the truth for them and map it on. So, like really this pterodactyl, he was taking what he knows about the sound of PT, pterodactyl, and mapping it on to today, to table, whatever it may be, right? So is he wrong here? He's using some higher level thinking skills, right? So because he's trying to map it on. And even when you think, we'll go back to French, for example, the adjectives, they're placed after the noun instead of before the nouns in English. So students may struggle with that. Or past tense, or, different languages construct past tense differently. Some languages don't even have past tense. So, so it may be a real, like, how can I figure that out? Like it's not a concept familiar in my language that I can figure that out. Even, subject, verb, object placement structure in a sentence. Some languages, they have it in a different order. So just thinking that it's not errors in English, it's something that the student is taking from what they know and trying to make sense of it in English. So, when we think about these language errors are seldom pointed out or criticized, but that, just thinking about that piece that they're doing some real high level thinking and taking what they know and mapping it on to what they're learning or what they're thinking they're understanding about English. And if we're not giving explicit instruction, they're going to make those errors over and over and over again and get frustrated when, they keep seeing that it's wrong on their page, right? So what we want to make sure is that when students are, especially in those beginning students, are getting that comprehensible input. So whatever they're taking in, the message and the content that they're receiving is the input, and that's understandable to them. And there's some different ways of looking at it so that they have some multiple representations so that we can break down that language heavy content through, like you said earlier, the use of visuals. And visuals can be images, they can be exemplars, they can be graphic organizers, video clips, sentence frames, and having those explicitly stated out. Those are really useful for them. And, sentence frames are amazing at how helpful they are. We're going to go into it a little bit, but I'll just share too that, just that little bit of French that I had. I did another course and the instructor, she provided sentence frames, and I was able to make make movie recommendations, share about my family, and justify why you should read this book or whatever it was, just through some sentence frames and being able to map things out in my home language as well. And that was just, like I came in and I got Je m'appelle Stephanie, and I was, a couple of conjugations of verbs and things like that, but that was it. And I felt really good about myself afterwards, right? So, and also thinking about tapping into that prior knowledge that students are coming with. So maybe they're researching in their first language. Maybe you're doing like a carousel activity where they're, just going from pictures. There's different pictures around the room, and then they can tap in that, then the pictures connect to the content, right? Again, in terms of speech, thinking about our speech rate and tone, that we kind of slow down, pause, speak clearly. Today I'm speaking a little more quickly because we've got a lot of material to get through, but and also thinking about nonverbal cues, right? So our gestures, body language, facial expressions, is it welcome? Does it show something that, the student finds approachable? There will be some cultural adjustments. There are some cultures where it's not respectful to look someone that's older or more senior in the eye, or there are some gestures that are considered quite rude depending on the culture. So just being aware of some of those things as well, but body language and making movements to show how to do things or whatever it may be, pointing, whatever. Also providing a clear explanation of tasks, so that kind of that modeling, that I do, we do, you do approach. Also, peer support is a huge benefit, that if you can tap into connecting, maybe you have more than one student that speaks the same language in the classroom. How can they connect, collaborate? And again, working with more proficient language users, then through that group collaboration stage is also a powerful resource. So thinking about those things in terms of comprehensible input. But then remembering that comprehension, thinking about those stages of development, comprehension comes before production. So in order for a student to understand something, they need to process it, and then they can produce something. So, so what's that input coming in? Is it comprehensible, so that they eventually can have comprehensible output for those items? I want to touch on a little bit about language environment. This is, once I read this in Katie Arnett's book, Access for Success, Making Inclusion Work for Language Learners, I was like, wow, this is big for me. And hopefully I can do justice to Katie Arnett's explanation. But thinking about making the invisible visible. And when we think about the language environment, it's both a physical and a cognitive space. So a physical space in terms of like what's around me, what clues and cues can I pick up on that that I can use to understand what's going on, or again to produce something. And also a cognitive space. So what's that thinking space that we're working with? And then, so a physical space, like I kind of alluded to, is a natural or instructed environments. So the breaking it down, oops, wrong side of my mouse. So the natural environment are those settings where language is used to carry out daily life. So, and when you think about daily life, it's not just, waking up, eating my breakfast, whatever it may be, but daily life at school is, about 6 hours, 6 hours long. And so what's in our classroom that can help them carry out those functions of the classroom? So what's happening in the classroom? Do I know, is there something in the classroom that can help me ask a question? Is there something in the classroom that can help me, understand and break down what the context of the unit or the lesson is? Is there something in the classroom that can help me connect to my classmate? So, and when we think about, when we're learning a language, maybe you've had the opportunity to travel in a country where you didn't speak the language of the country. Maybe you were in Mexico or Europe somewhere, or wherever it may be. But what did you rely on in your physical space to help you, say, find the bathroom, or find a grocery store, or find a restaurant? That, not just Google Maps, because, but, what helped you around to help find and navigate that space? What did you do when you were communicating with a store attendant, or, maybe a police officer to help you find your way, or whatever? What did you do to help you carry out, your vacation, right? So maybe you were looking for visuals, maybe you were looking for train signs to help you go to the right platform, things like that. So when you think, about your classroom, what does that physical space look like? Because I know for myself, I had lots of motivational posters on, and empowering messages and all that kind of stuff. But for me, as I began this journey working with language learners, I didn't have a lot that they could rely on that could help them with the lesson at hand. So we're going to go over a couple of ideas for that. And also the instructed environment where learner comes to and by language through that formal, explicit instruction. So how do I know? Are you going to teach them that the adjective comes before the noun in a sentence? Are you going to have like a little mini lesson? Are you going to have a little mini lesson on morphology of, globe and globalization? That they understand that those words are connected. Just little tidbits and things that they can use to expand and slowly expand their language, vocabulary and language. But then also the cognitive space. What are they expected to do with the language? Finding, like, is it purposeful for them? Do they really, want to talk about their cat or their dog? Maybe they don't have a cat or a dog. So maybe they want to talk about their parent, their family, their journey to come here. Maybe they want to talk about the school that they were at and things that they've learned already. So, but then remembering that the interaction demands shape how a learner comes to understand and use language. So the more that we're interacting with one another, so that they're having some peer collaboration, that they are, have, sentence frames so that they can, they're expected to produce full sentences, whether they be short, simple sentences or complex sentences, whatever it may be, but that they come to understand and use the language. So it's not just yes, no, shoulder shrug sort of responses. And what are they doing when they're thinking about language? Okay, so, and also just thinking about the language environment, how welcome are students' home languages in the classroom? Are they allowed to navigate, and bring their languages into the classroom and not feel afraid to use them? So are they allowed to, use translation, tech, whatever it may be? Are they allowed to, if there are more students that speak their language, are they allowed to use it? And can, when they're researching or whatever it may be, can they draw on their entire linguistic repertoire in their learning? Do they know that that's welcome, right? So just thinking about some techniques to make concepts clear that are from Echevarria's Folks and Shorts, Making Content Comprehensible for English Learners, the SIOP model. They talk about gestures, body language, pictures, objects that go alongside your speech, a model for a process, task, or assignment, previewing the material, allow them alternative forms for expressing their understanding and information, multimedia, other technology, repeated exposure to words, concepts, and skills. So once they start picking up on that, and graphic organizers are another one. So in terms of multiple representations, here's a couple of ideas where in terms of repetition, and just a little note too that we need to expose those words, phrases, and structures using those different modalities, listening, reading, speaking, writing, a minimum of 7 to 10 times in order for learning to go from that working memory to the long-term memory. So, if there's words in your vocabulary of your unit that you really want students to become familiar with, they don't have to write 7 to 10 times in each modality, but over those 4 modalities that they have at least 7 to 10 exposures to that. So here's a couple of ideas. This video is linked to this article. I know they're kindergarten students, but they do have some great point, or not kindergarten, but elementary students, but they have some great points on getting students to interact with one another. So if you're thinking about how can I get my student to work with more proficient more proficient speakers of the language, consider looking at, how you can embed some discussion dialogue, guidelines, some oracy into your classroom. So, and having some guidelines, group configurations, things like that. So take a look through that article when you have a chance, and also take a look at this video. It's quite amazing listening to these young scholars speak to one another respectfully and using sentence frames, sentence starters. Also visuals, sentence frames, anchor charts, such as interactive word walls. And just thinking about interactive word walls, you may think, well, what are they? And as soon as this loads, I can help answer that question for you. And so the word interactive kind of has that manipulative feel to it. And it's basically seeing how different concepts are related to one another in a more visual format, in a more, realia format, pardon me. So this is just, if we think, I know it's kind of small, I apologize, but then thinking about a traditional word wall, like hypothesis, a scientific method, this and that, and some pictures that go along with it. But, when we're thinking about an interactive word wall, some light, refract and reflect, and seeing some images about how those can kind of connect as well. So, and it gives you some ideas on planning the word wall as well. So instead of, and maybe in conjunction with those motivational posters, but thinking about like having an interactive word wall as well that pertains to your unit, so that they have purposeful language that relates to their content. Also thinking about targeted vocabulary, which words are important for the context. So maybe some matching exercises, like matching a visual to a vocabulary word. Maybe they sort and categorize as well. I have a couple of visuals in here for you that you may want to draw on that can complement your lessons or complement even this lesson picks is a great, yeah, it's a little girl on here. It's $36 per year, but it's, just some great, just want to show you some clip art that they have in here that you can, like different activities, animals. So to help with some of that basic vocabulary, in the first couple of weeks, like what are some foods, holidays, whatever it may be, that could help them, and also letters that could help them in those, first couple of weeks of school to kind of learn some of those. There's lots of different ideas in here that you can, if you have the link, this bit.ly/23sec-beg, so for secondary beginner, then you can take a look. They're all hyperlinked in this document. In also thinking about, especially for secondary learners, like, they've been exposed to so much environmental print and digital environmental print already. So if you look at this sound wall or alphabet wall, they're all kind of in conjunction with words, things that students may have been already exposed to back home, like social media or whatever, or maybe the things that they've slowly seen in their community as they've moved in, right? So we've got F for Ford, E for Egos, H for Home Depot, and these are some things, and I've embedded a video in here from Harvey Osaka, and on how you can develop language through digital environmental print. It's a, quite a quick little lesson, and just, just making that space available for them that because it's meaningful, right? They see these pictures like McDonald's and Nike in everywhere, and it's just because, you know, globalization, we've expanded, and you know, everything across the world, we see a lot of these images. So yeah, so take a look at that video. It's a little bit longer, not enough time to show you here, but you know, after you have the link to this, or once you get the PDF, that you can take a look at this. And also thinking about how visuals can help explain those word problems, right? So this is an example from a grade 7 math text. And there's a lot of information in here, like Asia, Dead Sea, Mount Everest. Like, for a student to navigate around that, like, how can we make it so that it's a little bit more understandable for them? So, you know, some of the things, some of those words that we want them to understand, like lowest point or below or highest point or above, because those are going to be words that they're going to see across all subject areas, right? So those, you know, introducing those even in a math context is pretty valuable. And you know, even distance, right? So highest, lowest, sorry. But by adding a visual, just a simple visual, that can break down the barrier of the language and help them kind of understand what that problem is all about. So even by adding a subtraction statement, what is a subtraction statement? Because the other piece is that in different countries, the symbols for mathematics can be different than what we use here. So yeah, so helping students familiarize themselves with what even the symbols, mathematical symbols are, can help them access the content a little bit better. And so those are just a couple of ideas for comprehensible input in terms of reading and listening, so those receptive skills. And then again, we want them to interact with one another. We want them to interact with the content. We want them to interact with their peers, their classmates, and not that they can just think that they're going to absorb the language by dousing it over their head. And that we can move towards some of that comprehensible output, because you know, our students, they're coming in secondary, they're going, we don't want to waste their time trying to get them exposed to academic content, that vocabulary of whatever it may be, right? So we want them to start getting some comprehensible output. So what can we do? Graphic organizers, I'm sure you're probably all familiar with graphic organizers, and they're excellent for showing some of that higher level thinking. And also it's a great visual for students just to kind of see, you know, in simplified format, where the relationships are. Working with one student that was in grade 10, I think it was, and he was in a social studies 10-2, didn't have a whole lot of English yet, but they were talking about globalization. And when I asked him what they were talking about, he was able to, you know, kind of parse out, and you could see that he was thinking about that graphic organizer, that the concept map that the teacher was sharing on the board. So he was talking about Walmart and this, that, and the other, you know, so aspects of globalization. So, and also, you know, just a regular T-chart, like, you know, animal cell, plant cell, and, you know, just, you know, remembering that when we're doing some assessments, that we're thinking, are we assessing the language? Is the language restricting them? Or are we assessing the understanding of concepts? So graphic organizers are one great way to kind of get over a little bit of the hurdle of language. And, you know, graphic organizers, some of those can be shared, you know, even that students make a visual for an idea or whatever it may be, instead of actually writing out the words. In terms of vocabulary building, maybe it's content vocabulary, maybe it's academic language that they, like define, similar, analyze, whatever it may be. Maybe we're trying to build that vocabulary with them. But a Frere model is a great graphic organizer for developing vocabulary. This is one model. There's dozens and dozens and dozens. So what's that? There's a lot of different Frere models out there. And this is just one that I drafted, where you can click on this template and students could, write the definition of the word in there. What's that word in their home language? Maybe they can add an image or a GIF, again, connecting those visuals to tap into that schema. And then that they use it in as an example or in a sentence. Maybe that's been provided, or maybe they translate one over from their language into English as well. I've got a little video here on using this template, how you can insert a GIF, how students could create their own GIFs using themselves, using GIFpal, lots of different ways. And then sentence frames. Sentence frames are such a powerful, powerful tool. Like I said earlier, when I came to this French kind of workshop, and just, je suis, got that, and je m'appelle Stephanie. It didn't come with much more French, but all the sentence frames that this instructor provided, and I was able to do so many things with the language. So thinking about having a visual, something like this, and providing a sentence frame can help students develop so many different types of sentences and show their thinking, right? So and then having them share with a partner, so that not that they're just writing them down, but that they share them with a partner, that they maybe categorize them, maybe they are listening to another student on their sentence frames, giving feedback on that. Oh, that's similar to what I have, or something like that. Sentence frames for one, but then picture word inductive model is another great tool, routine, for developing vocabulary and kind of building in that writing aspect, understanding concepts as well. This is kind of the outline of it. I'll go through it really quickly. So you can see that there's 5 phases. And then, the first phase is to shake out the words, and we're going to end up with 20 to 25 words. And so, for example, maybe you just take a picture, or from all those visual links that I shared with you earlier, pull a picture that might relate to your content there. So generating 20 to 25 words with the students. Maybe you have small group, maybe it's the whole class, maybe it's just, like a couple of you and a couple of students. Yeah, small group. And so let's see what we can do when we shake out the words. So some of the things you may notice here is that I've color-coded the different parts of speech for this. So I have purple for my adjectives, I have black for my nouns, I have red for my adverbs, I have green for my running, or for my verb. And so this is a great diagnostic tool to see what students actually do know for vocabulary. Do they know color words? Do they know, like, a girl? Do they know that she's happy? Do they know the color of her hair, that it's long, whatever it may be? But then you can also weave some specific words that relate to the content that you want to address So, if you think about this as a physics lesson, you can think about thrust or tension, gravity, propulsion, those kinds of things. So you can build those into this example as well. So color coding, and then once you think about color coding, also think that you want to stick with the same colors throughout the semester or throughout the year, so that students become familiar with, okay, purple adjective, and red adverb, green verb, things like that, so that they start to understand the parts of speech. And then you're going to have students sort those words into categories of your choice. Maybe it's words that start with T, or it's broader subject areas. And then you would have the students like sort those words, but then add 5 or so new words that fit into that category. So they would, okay, so these are color words. I've got these color words in here, pink, blue, yellow, red, and then they can add some of their own color words to that, so about five or so, using some translation, what have you, into those. And then students can complete like those first 2 phases, maybe in your first day, and then in the evening, then you could compile some of that and come up with some gap fill sentences. So maybe you create a worksheet that looks something like this after you make a copy. And then it's a great assessment tool. Like, did they understand? Do they have an idea of what the meaning of those words are? So like the girl is running, right? But if they put in gravity, thrust, or pink, then maybe they're just guessing. So maybe that would be, okay, what can we tap into building? What can you do referring to the chart, maybe some translation tools, whatever it may be. I've also linked this, oops, thought I did. It's very hyper with me. This sentence patterning chart. This idea of a sentence patterning chart in here for you. And it's a little video that's hyperlinked from Katie Topple on using a sentence patterning chart. And it's basically a graphic organizer of the parts of speech, and like your article, your adjective, your noun, your verb, adverb, and prepositional phrase, and then filling in that chart where students can build sentences from that. And then you can cut out those sentences, arrange them in strips or into categories, and then glue them under a category title, and then leave some space for additional sentences. And then students would write some new sentences and then turn those new sentences, the close or their own paragraph, into paragraphs. And I've added some translation tech for you here on the side. Say Hi is one, Google Translate or Microsoft Translator that students could refer to. And, by the end, students would have parts of a simple essay. And then the last phase is where students write a title. And so the newcomer students may come up with a list of potential titles and choose one. These are for your other students that's like level 2, 3 or higher level students, writing simple topic sentences or introductory paragraphs. And then just some other ideas about PWIM, so picture word inductive model, some other extension activities that you could do with them, like where students create closes themselves. Again, working with more proficient language students, and that they interact with everyone in the classroom. And then maybe you create some paragraphs about the images with blanks needing to be filled in by the students. Instead of those closed sentences, find a similar image, create a Venn diagram, maybe some thought bubbles into the picture. What could be happening on the other parts of the picture if it were larger. Now, I realize we're talking about secondary students, but this was an example I had from a grade 2 student where their task was to build a boat. But, as well in our secondary students, they produce something. Maybe it's an art class, or maybe it's in phys ed, and they take a picture of an action they did in phys ed, but they have no way of describing it. So the picture word inductive model is a great tool for developing that vocabulary and sentences so that they can describe their work and that they can share their thinking and their process of that. Also, it's great for classroom routines. When we think about students who are new to Canada, and the routines of North American school system could be quite different than what they've experienced growing up, or maybe they've had interrupted formal education. So, they've been out of the school dynamic for a while and are not familiar with the expectations or norms and things like that. So, picture word inductive model is a great for developing that functional language that they would need for negotiating school. So, and becoming familiar with those routines and practices that are available here, that are in the school. Also, word sorts. Word sorts are another idea about expanding vocabulary. I have a link here to WordWall where you can make up, and it makes games out of different, whatever you input, it can turn into a game. And so thinking about our affixes, or in this case suffixes, and how those words from the unit are related, or maybe just about concepts, right? So people, weapons, issues. So it's a great formative piece so that you can kind of see where students are with their understanding as well. So great little scaffold, great little assessment piece. Another approach too is thinking about the QSSA, which stands for the Question, Signal, STEM, Share, Assess. And it's a great tool for allowing students some time to think, and you're offering a visual in terms of the question, you're offering another visual in terms of how to start that response, and then also some time for that interaction so that they can talk to a peer and build off, their collaboration with their peer. I'm going to show you just a quick little example of what it looks like in math now, and I'll talk a little bit more about that once I show that to you. There we go.
Okay, so I have the question written up here for you. What do you know about slope? So it's very general. What are all the things that you can think of about slope? And I have some stems that can help you to make sure that you're writing complete sentences. Okay, so some examples of stems that you can use are slope is. I can find slope by. So what can we do? Some other names for slope are, or slope can be blank. So you can use any of these stems. If you don't need to use the stems, then you can use your own, okay? So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to start writing that off. You'll probably have about 2 minutes, so I'll set the timer for 2 minutes. Once you're done, the signal for me that you're done is pencils down. And when you're ready, you can answer the question, what do I know about slope? Go. Now, remember, we're writing.
During this phase too, that students could respond in their home language.
Okay,
this
so
question.
when we're sharing, the Windows person is going to share first. Okay, raise your hand if you're a Windows person. Yes. Okay, so Windows people are going to share first, and then you will have 30 seconds to share. Okay, when the timer's off, goes off, then my Walls person will share. Who's my Walls person? Yes, thank you. So my group of 3, right now you're listening, Angel. You're doing a lot of listening, okay? So 30 seconds. My Windows people are going to go. Ready, Windows people? Share.
So this student here was fairly new to, was from the States, but he was fairly new to the country. So
Okay, if there's anything that your partner said that made you say, oh, I knew that, right? I just forgot. Let's write that down right now, okay? You have about a minute to write that down. $30 seconds. If you don't need that 30 seconds, show me a fist. Okay, so a couple people still need it. That's fine. It's about 20 seconds now. Alexis, will you please share something that either you or your partner remembered about slope?
Me and my partner both remembered that slope can be called also unit rate or unit price. It can be found in graphs, and it's also can be negative or positive.
Awesome. That's a lot of vocabulary.
So you can see it allows for some processing time, right? So, and that interaction. So, and students are collaborating with one another. It's very structured. Students know the expectations. Now, the teacher in this example used it with writing in conjunction with writing. It could also just be like a verbal sort of share. So it doesn't, so that there is no writing involved. So there's different ways of implementing it, but also that it's very, you can differentiate it. So if you have your newcomer beginner student, they should be able to complete the sentence stem after working with their partners. So after they have some time, okay, I've got some input, and now I've got a sentence that I can share, that I can work from. And but maybe they're not expected to share that in front of the whole class unless they volunteer. And then as you move on, there's different ways of differentiating that. So, and just to think about, you know, when our students are coming and, you know, that so much to learn in a language that they're not familiar with, you may start to see a few behaviors. This is just some things that you may notice, like they may shut down. And this kind of jives with, you know, that cultural frustration phase, that or culture shock phase, where they're very frustrated and angry. So you may notice that they're shutting down. They're off task, where they're fidget. They don't know what they should be doing. They avoid things. They want out of their seat. They're overwhelmed. They need constant monitoring. They're sidetracked, daydreaming, frustrated, bogged down, need lots of breaks, need more time to complete a task, have difficulty following the pace of the lesson, or they give irrelevant answers or information. So, and those kind of behaviors, they kind of tie into what Stephen Krashen calls the affective filter hypothesis. So, and he says that affect refers to the outward expression of a person's internal emotions. So if a learner is tense, angry, anxious, bored, they may filter that input. And so they kind of build this invisible wall that filters out any learning. So this can this kind of hypothesis kind of came up in the early 80s that Stephen Krashen kind of did this work and research. But you know, now with exploration and research in brain science and things like that, Zaretta Hammond reflects on that in her book about culturally responsive teaching in the brain, and you know how that affective filter is kind of tied in with our limbic brain, with our emotional center of our brain. And she talks about the watcher, the guard dog, the Wikipedia pages, and you know, the watcher is kind of that reticular activate. It's not kind of, it is the reticular activating system, and it's constantly monitoring for threats or rewards. And it sends messages down to the amygdala, and the amygdala acts on that and sends, if it feels threatened, it'll send out those stress hormones, that adrenaline and that cortisol. And that in turn, those stress hormones affect the hippocampus, which is where our working memory is, and you know, where we make those connections to our background knowledge. And you know, our working memory, which is our short-term memory, it plays a significant role in language development and long-term memory. So and because our working memory is where that new information is interpreted and connections are made. So it's really important to make sure that our students' affective filter isn't heightened. So what can we do, like through partner dialogue, through sentence frames, through visuals, through honoring their name and their identity, that we can lower that affective filter hypothesis, or that affective filter, or that invisible wall, and you know, get feelings of like oxytocin and you know, their feel-good hormones that come into play. And also just thinking about that meta, right? So, and I'm not talking about this guy, you know, I'm not talking about Zuckerberg, but I'm thinking about that metacognitive awareness, right? And really, when we think about meta, you know, it is kind of invisible, but we want to make that invisible for our students. So, you know, thinking about their thinking, regulating their thoughts, that meta-linguistic awareness, how are they making those comparisons between the language that they're acquiring to the languages that they know, and looking at the nuances and the uses of language. And also thinking about metacultural awareness, like where, you know, so that they, you know, come to understand their own culture and then the culture that they're, you know, working in now. So, and how can they work between those two and building an understanding there. I'm not going to show you this video, but I just want to give you this tool and share with you about how important this is, a metacognitive strategy, and how important it is to help students build that vocabulary to share that they don't understand. So instead of saying, I don't know, or because it's an easy crutch, right? We probably see, you know, our regular English speaking students who've been born and raised in Canada, that they go, oh, you know, but we want to help them build that language that independent learners use. So maybe they need to ask for some more information or some time to think, or repeating the question. So this is a poster embedded in here. It'll ask you to make a copy. Don't print it off just at home on your computer. It's a big 2 by 2 foot by 3 foot poster. And there's some instructions in there on trying to, that you can use Google Translate to translate it into the student's language, so that they could have a small copy of it that they can refer to and then make connections to their physical environment where this would be posted, and that they can say, okay, in this, it says this in Ukrainian, you know, that connects to this first sentence here. So just thinking about that, because we want, and then there's a model of a conversation in there as well. So giving students the tools to access the information, and that they don't start building this habit of what to say, or instead of I don't know, so that they don't build that habit of just saying I don't know, pardon me. So just a quote from Tan Huynh, nothing robs students of their enthusiasm for school more than the inability to understand instruction. Schools become isolating, disempowering places when students are unable to participate in activities with their peers. So again, we want that interaction. We want them, you know, to be able right from day one to be able to connect with their classmates as well, whether they have the language or not yet. So what can we do? So just thinking about some of those questions that that you shared. Oh, I thought it was going to copy over, but it doesn't. So just thinking about, you know, vocabulary, and I won't go back, but so we talked about vocabulary, and we talked about, you know, getting students to connect with the language. So hopefully I answered some of those, and I apologize. I thought that was gonna get the same Slido that you did right from the beginning. But we can go back to the beginning at the end. So just briefly want to talk about some tech tools, and I realize I'm rushing now because we have less than half an hour, and I still have a bit more that I'd like to share with you. And I understand if you need to go, then that's fine. I'll just, like I said at the beginning, I'll just keep talking and you'll get the recording later. And just thinking about Google tools, some immersive reader, closed captioning, dual language texts as well, that you can access to help, you know, make that content a little bit more accessible for our students as well. So I've embedded a couple of videos throughout here as well. So some ways to use Google Translate. There's an article in here from Tech and Learning that you may want to look at, and thinking about you know, how we can use Google Translate if students are familiar with computers, that they've had access to them before. Maybe they can type what they know, and you know, maybe it's a little story about themselves, or maybe it's about globalization or photosynthesis. Maybe they have that they've had that learning experience already, that they type it in their home language, and that use Google Translate to create a first draft. I say first draft because there will be some discourse patterns that come across in Google Translate that may not, you know, be kind of in that academic way that we, you know, that we use English here. So, you know, so that you can use it a little bit as a guide and kind of get an idea of what students already understand. There's some different ideas on translating PDFs, and there was another one too. Oh, just, yeah, there's 3 ways. I'm sorry, I made this video a while ago and now I can't remember. Also some immersive reader, Microsoft Translator. If your students aren't familiar with, or they don't have the tech background yet, then you can just use the dictation feature on Microsoft Word, and then using immersive reader for that. So you can create some dual language text. Another great website is Wonderopolis. It's short little wonders of the day. And this gives you some information about how you can use it with immersive reader, and some information on Microsoft Translator. Also some information here about closed captioning and the transcript features for YouTube. If you're sharing a video, a YouTube video in your class, you can, one, show the video with closed captioning in students' home language. Won't necessarily be perfect, but they can get the gist of what the video was about. If they're, yeah, so that's one way of going about it. Also, the transcript feature, you can copy and paste that into Chat GPT. And if you've ever, once you look at the video, the transcript always has a timestamp with whatever the words were spoken. And you can remove those using Chat GPT by putting in this little prompt, and it'll come out with a beautiful kind of paragraphs, capitalization, punctuation for this transcript from the video. And then students could translate it. You can give it to students to review prior to showing the video, or even showing the video in conjunction with the write-up. There's lots of different options. Just another, a Google extension is WikiWand. I'm just going to escape out of here. And if I just want to Google rocks, using Wikipedia, I already have the extension on my Chrome here, on my Chrome browser. But so I'm just going to Wikipedia, and what it does is it changes the format of what's presented. So this here, if I clicked on this W, it would show what should show what it looks like on Wikipedia. So smaller image, smaller print, you know, just the formatting is yeah, a little bit different. And so this is what it looks like here on WikiWand. The print is a bit bigger, but also it has the information, like you can, depending, it may read it out. Some are available, some aren't. But if you go over here, it also has Google Translate embedded in it, so you can translate the text into, say, German, and then it can give you an idea of what that is in German. It also can show simplified English. So if you just if there's certain elements of it here that you want to use for a teaching piece that relates to the content, you know, it can give you a simplified version of the article that you could engineer and simplify even more if you decide to. But yeah, so just makes the article a lot shorter. So that's WikiWand for one. And let's see. So you can create like a dual language text by having the English version, having the version in their home language as well. And I'm just going to talk briefly about some academic language. And, you know, and when I talk about academic language, I'm talking about the language that happens across disciplines. So like the word summarize here, right? We would use summarize in English, social, science, you know, math, summarize your steps for solving this equation, whatever it may be. But, you know, again, students are going to map what they understand onto the word, and so they may summarize their book. Okay, so, and just a note to remember that, you know, when it comes to academic language, our EAL students don't have the luxury of waiting until they're fluent in English to engage in essential learning of content material. So they have to play catch up with native English speakers. So they have to backfill that vocabulary along with content, and that's further complicated by cultural factors. So just some things to think of, like we can't wait to build that academic language piece. So we kind of, in conjunction, we have to make it purposeful, build that those survival words that they're going to need, but also the academic language that they need to survive in the content areas. So poem is a great one. Sentence frames are a great one. And, you know, playing with their name and understanding their story is another one. just briefly touch on Jim Cummins's work on differentiating the different types of language. So there's basic interpersonal communication skills and cognitive academic language proficiency, BICS and CALP. And BICS is our survival language. So it's most of, like, if you think about from a vocabulary standpoint, it's very it's a lot of our language, or a lot of our vocabulary, and it's our functional language. So what we need to survive. So it's lots of visuals, nonverbal cues, so that we can get an idea of what that message is. And it's the language that we make friends with, invite people to play a game of basketball. Maybe it's, to navigate their way around the school. That's kind of an idea of what BICS is. CALP, on the other hand, is all that academic language skills. So and it's very abstract. So when you think about the word summarize, how could you connect a visual to that, right? So, and it's also the language that's necessary to discuss the content in the classroom. So lots of cultural references, lots of abstract concepts that are involved with that. So what we want to do, and again, back to making the invisible visible, we want to make sure that our language environment in our classroom addresses this invisible language, this academic language. What can we put in that physical space, that instructed space, that cognitive space that highlights the academic language that we're using in the classroom? And when you think about, academic language, how it varies and how the purpose of that academic language varies amongst the different disciplines, you can, like from this chart here, from disciplinary literacy, then, we want to make sure that our students, back to those interaction demands, the interaction demands of English are different than the interaction demands of science or math, right? So we want to make sure that students have lots of exposure and lots of opportunities to interact with the different demands of the different aspects of academic language across the disciplines. So, so how are they rating? How are they writing? How are they thinking? And not just putting it on the ELA teacher that they're going to be responsible for addressing language development for our students. It's everyone's responsibility. Just a little piece about communicative competence. Again, those variety of purposes. When we think about those interaction demands, we want our students to be able to communicate effectively across all of those disciplines. And, thinking about those brick words, those are our content words. Our mortar words are kind of like those sentence frames. What can sentence frames, paragraph frames that we can provide for our student that they can interact with full sentences and expand on those full sentences. It's kind of like, learning the rules of badminton or basketball or whatever. You kind of, watch the player, watch the map, or watch the layups and stuff, understand the rules of the game, and then from there you can start expanding on how you play the game, right? So I don't know if that really makes that much sense, but when you think about basketball players that they were taught how to do a layup, but then they eventually do it different ways, and that works for them. So these are just thinking about communicative competence. And thinking about academic language functions, those are the purpose. The function of language is dependent on its purpose. Are we describing, explaining, persuading? Again, language differs when we're depending on the purpose, right? Because if I'm describing something, I would use different structures, these language structures, than I would use when I'm explaining or persuading something. So those are just some things to keep in mind. Language functions, language structures. Again, functions are the purposes and the structures are those grammatical forms that are tied in. So if you think about a building, for example, you know, we have a purpose for a building, a purpose for a house. And so, and we build it a certain way. But then if we go to a gas station, it has a different purpose. It has a different structure. If we go to a school, that has a different purpose. It has a different structure than our house, for example. So, and also thinking about different languages, they construct their buildings differently. So we need to be aware, thinking about that pterodactyl, they're going to try to build a house the way that they're familiar with building a house, and not being aware of the building codes here in Canada. This is a link, hyperlink for you, just in terms of academic language functions, language structures, thinking about how you have a different task that's associated with different language functions. So the purpose to seek information, but this task is like defining, counting, whatever it may be. But the language structure, are students familiar with to be, the action verbs, the prepositions, things like that. But when we're asking them to compare something, there's different language structures at play when it comes to comparison, right? So they need to know some of these signal words like however, or as well as, whatever it may be. So when it comes to that, when we want to think about language objectives, and language objectives tie into content objectives in that content objectives are what students need to learn about the content topic, but language objectives are the what the students need to learn about English in order to learn, express, practice, and apply new information, demonstrate that knowledge, and perform academic tasks. So constantly we're thinking about, okay, today we're covering blah, but what is the language my students need to know that they can show that they understand, and that they so that they show that they understand. And this is part of the language environment. We want to create something for them that is a cognitive space and also involves that physical space as well. And you know, just thinking about the learning goal for your lesson and what's the language that students need to understand and explain those concepts, accomplish a task, or work cooperatively with others. And I put this quote in here from Dr. Jose Medina, and he talks about the language learning target as being a linguistic equity part of the lesson planning process. And you know, that if we ignore it, that it embraces that in linguistic oppression. And when I first read it, it really struck me in the gut. So I was like, you know, this is strong, but we need to make sure that our students have equity in the classroom, and the language is, by making the language visible, we are helping with that equity piece. Just an example of what a language objective may look like. The first thing that you would do would go into your program of studies and looking out an outcome that you want to address. This is grade 8 learning outcomes, mechanical systems unit. This is taken from here. Now, if I use this document, this academic language functions and language structures, if I go in there and I hit Control F, I can find a lot of these, you know, illustrate and and describing, comparing, interpreting, provide, illustrate. So those are all pieces that are about the functions of the language or the tasks associated with the functions, language functions. So, and I also want to think about my final assessment. So what are students going to need to be aware of, both in terms of content and language, when it comes to that final assessment piece. Maybe they need to be familiar with cause and effect or descriptive language. Are you making that explicit for them throughout the unit, that they have that cognitive space, that they have those interaction demands to build that proficiency in descriptive language structures, cause and effect structures, comparative, whatever it may be? Or, or maybe you're just highlighting, you're differentiating, maybe you're just highlighting one kind of language demand that is going to be outlined in the exam that the students, or the final assessment task that the students are going to be doing, but to be aware of the language that's going to be in that final assessment task. So, and being aware of, specifically planning for language can really help in determining what's the next step, right? So if you come to a benchmarking session later in the month, then you can see that the benchmarks kind of give you that guide of what's the next step that you can go to. But you need to be aware of what's the language that you're asking your students to use in order to program and plan for it. So what is some language objectives may look like? Compare and order rational numbers. I don't know where my other slide went. I thought I did one. Compare and order rational numbers. So number sense, this was the outcome. And a language objective, maybe we will explain our thinking about where rational numbers go on a number line using sentence frames, such as this one. So again, it's what we want our students to know and how are they going to show it. I thought, for whatever reason, I'll have to embed it in the slide deck afterwards. I don't know why I don't have the final language objective for this example. I apologize. I don't know where it went. Must have been fiddling around with the slide deck a little bit. My apologies. So just a template here for crafting language objectives, thinking about an action word connected to a domain. So reading, writing, speaking, listening. Link it to your academic content. What's a scaffold or support that you can put in place? And what's the interaction that students are going to have? Like, is it going to be with others, a group, or pair work, or whatever it may be? So that's one step. And, planning for language objectives is one step in teacher clarity, and it has a huge effect on student learning. So, that teacher clarity piece. And just to reiterate, or if I haven't stated it already, but content and language objectives, they need to be clearly defined, displayed, and reviewed with students at the beginning and end of each lesson. Again, this is part of that physical space. What can you put in place so that your students know where they're headed in their learning? If you have that language objective and content objective displayed, students can, especially secondary students, they can quickly Google it, or, something to refer back to, whatever it may be. So they can that they're not just waiting to hear the words that you're saying, because as you saw from that science lesson, that doesn't help with language learning. So, because you don't know what to pay attention to. And when we have a content and language objectives, students will find what to pay attention to. And they're just a very small move, but they make a big impact. And the other piece, here's an example from Dr. Carol Salva, but using this academic language, right? I can make inferences and provide evidence from the text by completing my inference chart. So inferences is an academic word, right? But annotating it so that it's a little bit more in student-friendly language is one way. Or, maybe students can share what inferences is in their home language, and that they can include that. So you know, having them working together with students, annotating them together, it can ensure that those goals and the vocabulary are understood by all. So just taking 5 minutes at the beginning and the end of your lesson to annotate and go over the language goals of the lesson can have a huge impact, not only on our beginning proficiency students, but also, academic language isn't something that students use at the dinner table, really. So I don't know. I can't recall when I've talked to my kids when they were in high school, talking about what inferences can you make about, whatever it was. So just thinking about that. So reinforcing that academic language with all students. So, and here's that copy of that, which I thought was going to work, but hopefully you made some connections to your questions that you had relating to our generated questions about tech tools and academic language. Yeah, so some things in there. And also just to think about our students that they come with language or languages already, and that drawing on that full linguistic repertoire that they come with is a foundation for additional language learning. And it's an important tool for learning. And just like their name, it's an important component of their personal and cultural identity. So we want to embrace that and build off of that. And also just thinking about the competencies within the program studies, within the curriculum, that all of these critical thinking, problem solving, managing information, creativity, collaboration, and global citizenship, all of these can happen in any language, right? So if you take a look over at the supporting document here from Alberta Education, you can get the print version, you can get the descriptions, but what each one of those are, it gives examples. So also thinking about those core competencies as well. Let's get out of here. All right, so that's one little piece there. And I've put a couple of resources in here. Core practices, there's a YouTube videos if you are interested in watching a few videos to further your practice. There's a research study that was put together in a series of playlists for YouTube, on YouTube. Creating a welcoming classroom environment. There's a few more pieces of information embedded in that article there. Literacy foundations, building phonemic and phonological awareness with our students. If you're looking for some resources like flashcards or short grammar stories or even grammar lessons, like what's past perfect, what's simple perfect, verb conjugations, things like that. You may want to check out ellie.com. It used to be formerly the ESL library. It is a subscription, but you can get it's about $140 for the year. There's lots of ways too that you can have kind of if you're solely responsible for teaching a group of newcomers, there's like resources like digital resources in there as well that you can monitor and assess their language. The Scholastic Talk About series is kind of a little bit more for the younger side, but there is in their science series, there's a lot of things that relate to the science curriculum for grade 7 especially. So check those out, see what you think. And then that's about all I have for that I've just shoved down your throat. And, and hopefully you've got a few ideas from here. Hopefully I don't know, if you have any other questions, feel free to turn on your mic or type them in the chat, and hopefully I can address them. But I appreciate those that stuck around for the extra couple minutes here. And if you have any other questions that may come up later, you have my email address there that you can, you know, contact me for any of that as well. Oh, great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I hope there was a lot of information there, but yeah, there's more that I could share with you. This is just to scratch the tip of the iceberg. So, but I hope it gives you a place to start. So. I'll just stop the recording here.